What's up, YouTube? In today's video, we're going to be looking at ASP.NET Core web applications and Ngrok. If you don't know what Ngrok is, I'll be explaining that to you in this video. But primarily, this video is for those of you who are stuck or struggling with using Ngrok with ASP.NET Core, especially the .NET 3 Core 3.1 versions. I believe there are some defaults that have changed in the latest version of .NET Core, and that is going to likely give you some trouble. A colleague of mine recently introduced me to Ngrok, so I got curious to start using it. And then last week, I decided to start using it, and I was stuck like almost instantly. So, and it took me like a whole day, practically half a day, to figure out how to get it to work with ASP.NET Core web applications, especially the HTTPS route. And so, as a way of me having to remember something and hopefully it will help somebody else from not having to struggle as much as I did, I thought it'll be nice to make this video. That way it's there. Even I can look at it in the future when I'm stuck somewhere on this sort of thing, or anyone else that's stuck can use this video. So I'm not an expert on Ngrok. I understand the concepts and I use it just bare minimum, but it works for me in the way that I need it. And it works for me with ASP.NET Core applications. So this video is really about that. There'll be two parts to this video in the same video itself. So for those of you who just want sort of the answer or that high level, okay, what's the problem and then what's the solution thing, I'll do that part first. But then we're going to be building an application using Ngrok and an external website. In this case, it's going to be Alexa. Whoops. And you get that application, the Amazon application, to call into my application on my local machine. Because that's kind of the scenario. So I'm going to explain all of the scenarios as to when and why you would use Ngrok, and then ASP.NET Core, and then deeper examples of actually using something for real, not just talking about it. All right, so that's the second part. Okay, so what is Ngrok? When and why would you use it? Towards trying to explain to you the when and the why you would use it, I need to explain to you what webhooks are in case you don't know what webhooks are. This is just, sort of I'm putting it out there, just in case, making no assumptions. And then using Ngrok with ASP.NET Core. So the ASP.NET Core part will be two things. One is that simple application. If you know what the heck you want and how it works and everything else, you just tell me how this thing needs to be configured. That first part. The second part is then going deeper into the application itself, as in a full-out application in case you never used it or you want to start using it, Ngrok, and maybe hopefully I'll inspire you to build your own Alexa skills as well. All right. So what are webhooks? Essentially, think of webhooks as a push notification mechanism. That is, let's say I'm an application, you are another application. Things are happening in my application, events, if you will, and you would like to know when those events occur. Right? So it's kind of like messaging, except using HTTP itself. Right? There's no actual AMQP, AMQPS, or message brokers kind of thing. It's a simpler mechanism. You're basically saying, hey, Shiv, when so-and-so happens in your application, can you just please call me on this HTTP endpoint? I'll make available, as in you'll make available this HTTP endpoint on your application, and you want my application to call your application. Right? Sounds simple enough. So a single webhook or an application that surfaces webhooks, typically in the public domain, could have multiple events, and you would like to be notified of the events. So you're effectively subscribing to these events, and then each time an event occurs, you want to give them an endpoint, an HTTP endpoint, that is your endpoint, that's pointing into your application, so that when that event occurs in this application, it will call your application's endpoint. The application that is calling or allowing you to kind of subscribe and configure your endpoint is called the webhook, right? I don't know if there's a webhookie. This application is called the webhook. There's a confusion, but essentially the application that's surfacing the events and that subscription capability is called a webhook. And the differentiator between a webhook and, let's say, a message broker message is one is using AMQP, AMQPS. It's a different protocol. And the webhook is the name or terminology for these kinds of messages where you can subscribe, but the message is coming over HTTP and the application has to provide those events. So there are some applications on the internet, in the public domain, that actually provide these kinds of events. So you have GitHub that can it publishes events for all kinds of actions you might take on your repo or your organization or your project. Right? It inserts, updates, deletes, PRs, all these sort of things. So you can subscribe to these events. And when you subscribe to the events, you're basically saying, call me at this URL. Not typically because the applications themselves are in the public domain. They can't just call into your application on a local machine on your desktop or laptop or whatever. That's not going to happen because public web applications or websites cannot just walk into your network and start hitting machines on your network, which is, of course, as you can imagine, that's for your own protection. But that protection seems to sometimes get in the way. So what if you want to develop an application? Before we get into that part, I'm just going to now show you diagrammatically. So if you look at this slide here, imagine this is your home or office or whatever network. Okay. So within your home or office, you have a router. May not look like this, but that's the router. And then your machines are either directly connected to this router via Ethernet cables or via the Wi-Fi, right? So what I'm showing you here is a bunch of devices in your home that are connected either to the network or through Wi-Fi. And they're all going out to this router. Now what Ngrok is a regular command line executable. It's just a standard exe. Just download the Windows version of it and run it and you're done, right? That's it. There's no other thing to get started. Of course, there's documentation that will help you understand how to start to use it. But in and of itself, it's just a standalone executable, all right? So this executable is potentially, imagine this is your desktop application or the one you're using to develop your application. And so even though I'm showing this Ngrok thing to be outside, it's really running on inside your application. Right? It's an application running on your desktop. I just sort of showed it over here, so it's easier to see it. But basically, this is running on your desktop, right? So when you run this application on your desktop, it in turn is establishing a connection with home, which is the ngrok.io domain, right? So there's a server on that domain that is publicly accessible. And when you run your application on this machine, the Ngrok application, it in turn is contacting or is able to reach out to the ngrok.io domain and server on that application. All right. So the connection is being established outbound, meaning it's the Ngrok application on your desktop that's establishing a connection with some server outside, right? It's not the server from the outside coming in. It's outbound from your desktop. Just keep that in mind. So the basic idea with Ngrok is that it provides a tunnel, and that's what this yellow line is about. There's a connectivity between the Ngrok server, which is here, which is on a public domain, on ngrok.io. And when you run up your application with the right parameters and such, then the Ngrok application establishes a tunnel between your machine, this specific machine, not the network itself, but just this specific machine, and the Ngrok servers. The reason we have got to do this, there's a few ways to get into your network. Right? You could modify the proxy settings, the firewall rules in your router to say, hey, when some traffic on so-and-so port comes through, then allow that traffic to hit my specific machine with an IP address on the local network. Then you can do that. If you know how to configure the routers for that, firewall rules for that, that's fine, except that's kind of open-ended, right? Anything can come in through that port on a certain, say HTTPS traffic or HTTP traffic. So that's not quite as safe or as well recommended as using like an Ngrok. What Ngrok does is it establishes a tunnel, TCP tunnel. So it's not even an HTTP tunnel, it's just plain old TCP tunnel. And TCP, by the way, just without going into too much detail, TCP is a kind of like is layer 4 in terms of the OSI stack. And HTTP is layer 7, I think. Doesn't matter. HTTP rides on top of TCP. TCP is the communications kind of data transmit protocol, while HTTP is what we call the wire protocol, right? So TCP is a much lower level protocol, which is dealing with the actual packets being transmitted and the acknowledgements across the two sides, the client and the server. HTTP simply is the kind of the wire protocol. Is how do you communicate the data across, but not the actual at the packet level, at the data level. So Ngrok actually works at the TCP level. It doesn't quite understand HTTP or HTTPS. It's just using TCP. It just creates a TCP tunnel between your machine and the Ngrok servers, right? And that'll all come together once I show you the actual thing working. And then once that's established, basically when you go to GitHub or Azure or Alexa and you say, hey, can you on so-and-so event in your repo or whatever, in Azure, there's a ton of webhooks typically for alerts and such monitors where you can say when this application CPU utilization reaches this, at this level, or memory utilization reaches this level or whatever, send me an alert. And then when you configure the alert, you have the option to say, hey, call me on this webhook. And you can provide your URL so that the alert can come to your application. Of course, when you're developing the application, that's where the problem starts. Like when you're developing, you don't even know what you're going to get. Like what is the Azure, or Alexa or whoever is, what is the data they're going to send you, right? So we're going to go through that process, but that's going to be the sort of the part two. This part one, I'm just going to show you Ngrok and the issues with ASP.NET Core. Start up a simple application, write no code at all in the application, and see the whole thing working. Then part two starts when actually developing some real application. Okay, so the idea is when you provide a URL to these guys, when you run this Ngrok application on your machine, it provides to you, and I can probably just show you. So let me do that. Okay. So I'm just going to do Ngrok and HTTP, and let's say, 80. So Ngrok gives you these URLs. So these are the public URLs. And you see or notice that these are for ngrok.io, right? And this is just some random thing. It'll change each time you run Ngrok. The subdomain part, as we call it here, will change for this instance. So it's not going to be constant. If you shut down this Ngrok application, that URL will change the next time, which you have to be, of course, aware of, because if you're setting this up in a public domain website saying, call me at this URL, it can't change, right? If it does change, then you have to go back in that public application and set that URL again to the new endpoint. So just be aware of that. So anyway, this is that subdomain. That's like a random subdomain. This is the Ngrok IO, and this application here is connecting to the ngrok.io server running on the Ngrok domain, ngrok.io domain. And that's what I was trying to show you over here. Okay? And this is the tunnel that is established. The URL that you provide to the application that's providing you with a webhook in the public domain would be this URL, or this one, HTTP or HTTPS, so that they can reach. Let me just go back here. So when you set that up, you're setting up an endpoint that hits this server. This server knows that when you get this kind of an endpoint with the specific subdomain, that subdomain has to be sent to this specific machine here and on the internet somewhere, right? So that conversation or communication happens between your Ngrok device on your machine and the Ngrok servers. And the conversation occurs from any public domain website, and the Ngrok servers is simply sort of translated and eventually hits your machine, which is a pretty cool thing. Think about it this way, right? If I want to build an application right now, right this instant, and I want you to be able to browse to it. It's on my desktop, right? And you would like to browse to it while you're talking to me on the phone or whatever else. You might be anywhere in the world. There's no way for that to occur easily, right? So with Ngrok, that's very simple to do, because I can have Ngrok, spin it up, and it'll translate this, the external IP to the internal IP, and it'll hit my machine. And that's really the point of it. Okay. The difference, or the reason that we are doing this is that this internal network is on a NAT, or we call it a network address translation. These IP addresses are not routable IPs. They are private IPs. In other words, they cannot be reached from the outside. Now, the whole range of 192.168.1 or 192.168 are not all private, but most of the IPs you'll see internal to your house, of course, are all private. The intention is that you don't want people from the outside being able to come into these networks. Okay, this is by design. There are other private addresses like 10 dot and so on. Again, it's not the whole range, but if you see a 10 dot or 192 dot, you know that there's potentially a private IP address, right? It's not routable. So these are called non-routable IP addresses. They don't get routed on the internet. Whereas addresses like these are routable, and so applications in the public domain cannot reach this IP address. This IP address is very specific or local to this network here. behind this router. If you have two routers in your house, they will each have their own network, if you will, unless you pair them up, as on the same network. Technically, they will each manage their own network. And so even within your home, you can have two completely different networks and they can't talk to each other. So these addresses are for the local machine here, while these are for the internet. And so these are routable IP addresses. So any application in the public domain has to have a routable IP address. So if you wanted to hit my application on my desktop, there's no public address. You don't have one, I don't have one, right? So but when I run Ngrok, I get a public address and I can say, hey, go browse to this thing and hit that IP address, so that domain name. And Ngrok will retranslate and send it to my machine. So it'll hit, like a breakpoint or something on my machine right now. Right? So that's the idea. One way to kind of see it is it helps you share, things working without having to deploy them somewhere in the cloud, and certainly help you develop applications like webhooks and such. So I like the Alexa thing I'm going to talk to you about. Alexa does not serve as a webhook, but I'm using it as one. So because of the difficulties with development, right? In order to even test it, you got to deploy something. And then when you deploy it, you don't have a debugger at your disposal. You don't have the debugging tools at your disposal. And so you have no idea what's happening. You're flying blind. It's a lot of trial and error, deploy, trial and error, deploy, trial and error. It's just a pain. So what I'm going to show you with Ngrok is you can develop locally until you're ready to deploy and then deploy. It saves you a lot of that cycle and speeds up the process and makes the whole process a lot more enjoyable. All right, so I'm going to start with the application itself. So this is Ngrok, as you've seen. It's already started up. I started up with saying on port 80. So basically, if I browsed to this application here, this endpoint here on the public domain, using a browser or Postman or whatever, it's going to hit some application on my local machine here. In this case, localhost 80. I don't know if there's a localhost 80. There's no server running on my machine on this thing. So I'm going to close this or kill this. You can shut this down by just Control C, and that'll kill it. Okay. What I'm going to do, I'm going to spin up a brand new ASP.NET Core web application. This is a .NET Core 3.1 app. All right. So let's make it a web API app. Yeah, that's good. Web API application. Cool. So I'm not changing anything. This is just straight out of the box. I'm going to start having issues. I'm going to go take you through the issues. This is going to be a comic show because you're going to see me stumble and fall and go through my thought process so that you understand the problems. Also, I'm not going to give you here's a solution. Remember, I'm going to tell you how to understand the problem, why the problem occurs, and then give you the solution to that. So that's what's going to happen. All right. Okay, spin this application up. This is this default. It's that weathers, whatever this is going to show you. Endpoint, it should work. You should see some data here. Cool. So this application is running. Okay, it says 44377. I don't know if you know what I'm seeing here, but this is what I'm looking at. Right, the port number. Okay, so then what they tell you is you can just do that. 44377. 44377. Cool, nice port number. All right, so it's now going to direct, if you call, if anyone from the outside, from the public domain calls this endpoint, it'll be redirected to this endpoint. Nice. Let's play with it. Let's test this out. So I'm going to leave this browser instance alone. I'm going to start out another browser just so we can keep these two things separate. That's another browser. All right, let me browse to that domain. Let me also show this app here. Like that. You should see something happening here, right? When I browse to this domain. So there. Got something. We got a GET request. Of course, we hit the GET request here. So the tunnel between the browser and also the internet, because the browser is on my local machine, has gone out to the internet and come back, as in through Ngrok. Not like the browser knew it's going to come back. It went out to ngrok.io, but ngrok.io sent it back to its application, the little app running on my desktop. That application receives the request, and you think, okay, so that part is working, right? But why isn't my data coming? Like, why is it? It seems to be hung up here. for some reason. So you can get stuck there wondering, I don't know what's going on. Maybe I got the wrong setting and this is like my thought process, right? Like, what the heck? So it turns out that Ngrok, this little application here, is also a little web server. And that means I can browse to the local little web server. And that's on port 4040. Let's do that. So I go to 4040. And what it does is this application has shown me so far that you got one GET request and it says it's waiting to receive a response. 1 minute so far. I don't know if you can read that. Right? So it's a browser-based application that's hitting this Ngrok instance here. All right. And its Ngrok instance on port 4040 provides a little web application that you can see things. And this is going to come very handy as we develop, move forward from here. This is a very cool little tool. Makes your life a lot easier. Besides the ability to kind of debug things, it's also helping you with building your application and debugging your application. It's a pretty neat thing. I don't think a lot of people know this aspect of it. Okay, so no luck here. This thing is still spinning. Nothing going on. You say, all right, so this is not going to work. Oh, there it is. Bad gateway. What the heck is a bad gateway? Why am I getting a bad gateway here? So what's the response? I can't see the response. I don't know. This one here. This is still waiting. So now it's made a separate request for the fave icon, which it normally does for any browser, HTTP. And now this thing is stuck waiting for it. So you got another request here for fave icon. And now this is going to wait and get a bad request here as well. We're not seeing anything here necessarily, but we're seeing it as a response, right? So the Ngrok UI is not saying anything, except the browser is getting a bad gateway, right? And if you don't understand what a bad gateway is, you're thinking, okay, I don't know what the heck this means, right? So you say, okay, well, maybe I need a different command line. So it turns out that you could potentially use a different command line, but that's not really the problem, okay? So the bad gateway will then eventually, so let's say we start looking at something else. If I look at this application here, right? This is the HTTPS, let me zoom in here. This is the HTTPS endpoint. Probably here, okay. So this application is expecting to be on 44377, which is the HTTPS endpoint. So I actually use the HTTP endpoint. I need to use the HTTPS endpoint for 44377 port. So okay, let's do that. My bad, didn't see that. Okay, so let's do, or we could say, what's the local, the non-HTTPS endpoint? Let's look at that. So if you look at your .NET Core application and you go into your properties and launch settings, then you'll see here that the non-secured port, the HTTP port, is 55081. While the SSL port is 44377. So we want this one, 55081. All right, let's try that. So I'm going to have to kill this Ngrok again. This time, instead of giving it the 44377, we'll give it the 55081. 55081. Okay, so this is the, again, it's not HTTPS. We'll get this URL. Better get this. The application is still running, right? And then over here, yeah, let's try this. And this Ngrok site is, if I would refresh it, there's nothing there yet. Right? We restarted the Ngrok little application on our desktop. Let's go back here. This time we're using HTTPS, using that port, and immediately we get a response that says invalid hostname. What the heck am I here? So you see that it's immediately come here. It says 400 bad request, and the response for that request is saying invalid hostname, right? So what is going on there? Why is that a problem? What's the request coming in? That's easier to see it in the raw. Right. So the request, the host name coming in is the ngrok.io, but of course we want the host name to be our local host because our local host application is on the local host thing. So we're going to need to tell Ngrok to run on that port, but also sort of forward it as this host name, modify that host name request that came in, from the calling application that we actually went to ngrok.io, but we really want to go to localhost on this machine. So change that host name. So I'm going to kill ngrok again, Control C. And this time I'm going to say, okay, that's 55081, but I want the host header, so host dash header, to be localhost on port, the same port 55081. All right. And now run it. And now let's try the same non-HTTPS endpoint or the HTTP endpoint. Oops. I don't know if I copy that. Okay. Let's try it again. Now what? What is going on? So now there's a temporary redirect. You get what I'm going at, right? This was my experience, literally in this sequence. And I'm thinking, oh, man, it's like every step there's a problem, right? And I hate it. Now, I don't mind spending my time trying to figure this out. But boy, other people should not have to go through this process. There's no documentation on this stuff. And that's the reason I want to make this video. So one, I don't forget this experience. And two, I can help other people out. But this is the sequence. If you're going through the sequence, this is what you're going to hit upon. One issue after another. It requires you to understand kind of like what's going on behind the scenes, under the hood, understand HTTP to really nail this problem down, right? So now it says, you can see here, it says 307 temporary redirect. What redirect? I don't understand what the redirect. Oh, you know what? Maybe the redirect is, this is my own thought process, by the way. I'm thinking, redirect. Of course, there's a redirect. Look at that. See, if I call GitHub, ask GitHub to call me on this domain, it's redirecting to my machine over here through this tunnel. So there's a redirect going on. Okay, cool. That's fine. But then why is it just stuck there? Where's the next thing, right? Apparently it doesn't know there's a next thing. So if you look at the HTTP request and response, you can see for this request, this is the last one. Basically, as the new ones come, they come on the top here, right? So you can see our host header now changed. The previous host headers were saying ngrok.io. The latest request has localhost at that 55081 port, which is cool. But for some reason, the ngrok is redirecting it, but then it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. You need to look at that. What is going on there? I say, oh, wow, that's unusual, right? Ngrok is using IS or ASP.NET. Man, that's... Oh, wait a minute. This is not Ngrok. This is actually hitting our ASP.NET application now. But the ASP.NET application is sending a 307 temporary redirect to this application, to this endpoint. Oh, it's redirecting to the HTTPS endpoint. I'm coming in on the HTTP endpoint, but it's redirecting it to the... Why is it doing that? Let's figure that out. Okay, so if I'm on... this is my application running here on this browser, right? So if I go to the HTTP endpoint, I forget that port number. What was the port number? 55081. 55081. Oh, it's working. Oh, it changed the port number again. Look at that. So even though I'm browsing to HTTPS on port 55081, when I hit enter, it gets modified. Oh, ASP.NET, the framework. Remember, this is just a default application. I didn't modify anything. The framework itself is, for whatever reason, redirecting HTTP traffic to HTTPS traffic, because then the port changes. That 307 redirect, temporary redirect, is coming from our ASP.NET Core application. But Ngrok is not a web browser. It doesn't understand HTTP response cores. What the heck is a 307? It's working at that TCP level. So a browser that understands HTTPS or HTTP would say, okay, you send me a 307, I'm going to go there now. So you say 307 redirect to here, and the browser knows what to do and goes there instead. Ngrok is just working at the TCP level. It doesn't understand 307s and 504s and 503s and all that. So it's not going to respond correctly. So as far as Ngrok is concerned, it got a response, 307, cool. But 307 actually meant it's supposed to go somewhere else, and it's not working because Ngrok is not going anywhere. It doesn't know it's supposed to go anywhere. So that's why we have the 307. But the problem is, where's the 307 coming from? It's coming from our ASP.NET Core application. But did we write anything? We didn't. Like, where's it coming from? It's coming from the framework, right? So we're going to look at that now, what's going on there. So I'm going to shut this browser down. This time I'm going to leave Ngrok running. I don't need to change that. But I'm going to go into our ASP.NET application and look at our code. I'm going to go into startup here and look at startup for a bit. Oops. Where are we? You see it? Do you see it? Oh, look at that. That is there. So it says use HTTPS redirection. So there is middleware here that says use HTTPS redirection. And it's doing the redirect to HTTPS. How would we comment this out? I'm just trying to get this thing to work. Like, I don't want that whole frustration to build up. Oh my gosh, can't get this damn thing to work at all. All right, so this app's working here. Let me go to the other browser this time and look at this one here. And since I'm not restarted Ngrok, it's the same, domain and all that. Probably want to copy that domain name, the HTTP version of it. This also we shall refresh here. So this got just a 307 redirect. And hit that. I don't think we need to do the weather thing with the forecast endpoint here. There you are. Now it works. So this is what it took just to get started, right? But now the problem is we are sort of bypassing that HTTP part. In real world, you want your endpoints from the public domain to be calling your applications using HTTPS because you want your application also to be secure or provide a secure, API. Some cases like Azure, well, I think Amazon, you don't have an option. Amazon and Google, they require an HTTPS endpoint. If you want them to call you, as in they're publishing the webhook, then they expect you to provide them with an HTTPS endpoint. So how will that work? Right? So that's the problem. So far, we're going to bypass that part. Get HTTPS working. I'm going to cut just that part short because it took another couple of hours at least trying to figure this out as to how to make it work on HTTPS. It's not as simple. Now that we bypass HTTPS, how do we actually make it work on HTTPS? See, that's where the issue is. It seems like it should be a simple thing, but there's nothing in the documentation. It's deeply buried somewhere, and unfortunately, I can't find it anymore. So the basic idea is I don't want to be commenting this out, right? I want it to be like that. I want my application to be secure and also provide a secure front end. And I should be able to run this application from the outside, from a public IP address and hit it on this machine here on local host with the HTTPS on 44377, right? That's what I'm trying to do. So towards that end, what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to have to kill this. All right. And this time I'm going to have to add here. So instead of this HTTP and the port, I'm going to put in HTTPS : local host : but this time I'm going to use the port numbers as our secure port numbers. So 44377, all right? 44377, and the same over here for the host header. 44377, right? All right, so now so I'm going to use the HTTPS endpoint now, this time here, and I'm going to use my thing here, and I'm going to leave the endpoint here, the end trailing endpoint, end. Okay, so it's HTTPS blah blah, the public domain / that, right? Look at that. First time it hit, and we got there. That's hitting the 44377 endpoint, and it's all okay. Cool. So that's what it took just to get Ngrok and ASP.NET Core, the new version of ASP.NET Core, working correctly with HTTPS. Pretty cool, huh? So you have both options, but personally, I'd say if you have both options of using HTTP or HTTPS, just use HTTPS. All right? Okay. If that's all you wanted to know, how the heck to make this thing work, I know what Ngrok is and how to use it. I've got my own ideas about it. Fantastic. This is it.